In the marble-floored boardroom of Hartwell Technologies, my father-in-law stood before 20 executives and smiled as he announced my termination. "Sophia clearly lacks the competence for this role," Richard Hartwell declared, his voice echoing off glass walls while my husband sat silent beside him. The security guard was already approaching with a box for my belongings. 6 months later, I stood on stage at the Global Tech Summit as Forbes announced my startup had just been valued at $800 million, and Richard Hartwell was in the audience watching his company's stock price collapse in real time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hartwell Technologies executive boardroom overlooked downtown Seattle from the 42nd floor, offering a view that was designed to remind everyone in the room exactly how high they had climbed and how far they could fall. I had admired that view dozens of times over the past 3 years, had stood at those windows during breaks and strategy sessions feeling proud to be part of building something significant. On this particular Tuesday morning in March, I could not bring myself to look at it. My eyes stayed fixed on the presentation materials spread across the mahogany conference table, on the quarterly performance reports that told a story I had worked 18-hour days to create, on the strategic recommendations that represented 6 months of analysis and careful planning. 23 people sat around that table. I knew each of them by name, knew their communication styles and priorities, knew which ones valued innovation and which ones prioritized risk mitigation above all else. I had presented to this board 4 times before, had earned nods of approval and follow-up questions that suggested genuine engagement with my ideas. This morning felt different from the moment I walked through the door. The energy in the room carried an undercurrent I could not quite identify, something that made my instincts whisper warnings even as I smiled and greeted the executives who had arrived before me. My father-in-law Richard Hartwell sat at the head of the table in the position he had occupied for 26 years as Chief Executive Officer of the company, his father founded in 1971. Richard was 63 years old, silver-haired and commanding, with a kind of presence that made junior employees straighten their posture when he entered a room. He had built Hartwell Technologies from a regional software company into a national enterprise solutions provider with offices in 12 states and annual revenue approaching $2 billion. Every profile written about him emphasized his business acumen, his strategic vision, his ability to identify talent and nurture it into leadership positions. I had believed those profiles once. I had believed that marrying his son meant joining a family that valued competence and rewarded hard work. My husband Marcus sat 3 seats to Richard's left, positioned among the senior vice presidents despite having considerably less experience than most of them. Marcus was 34, handsome in the way that comes from good genetics and expensive grooming, charming when he chose to be and coldly dismissive when he did not. We had been married for 4 years, together for 6 before that, and I was only beginning to understand how much of our relationship had been performance on his part and self-deception on mine. He had pursued me during my final year of business school with the kind of focused attention that felt like genuine interest in who I was and what I thought. I had interpreted his questions about my classes and career goals as intellectual curiosity, rather than recognizing them as assessment of my potential usefulness to his family's business. Marcus did not meet my eyes as I took my seat. He was scrolling through something on his phone with the slight frown he adopted when he wanted people to think he was engaged in important business. 2 seats away from him sat Jennifer Hartwell Cross, Richard's daughter from his first marriage and Marcus's half-sister. Jennifer was 41, whip-smart and professionally polished, running the company's enterprise sales division with ruthless efficiency. She had never been warm toward me, but she had been professionally civil, which I had accepted as the best I could expect from someone who had been with the company since graduating from Wharton at 23. The chief financial officer was reviewing printed copies of the quarterly reports when Richard called the meeting to order with a sharp tap of his pen against his water glass. The conversation fell silent immediately. Every face turned toward the head of the table with the kind of focused attention that Richard commanded without effort. "Thank you all for being here," Richard began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who had chaired thousands of meetings and knew exactly how to control the room's energy. "We have significant ground to cover this morning. The first quarter results require serious discussion, and we have strategic decisions to make about resource allocation for the remainder of the fiscal year." I waited for him to proceed with the standard agenda review, to work through the preliminary items before reaching the portion of the meeting where I would present the digital transformation initiative I had been developing. Instead, Richard's gaze moved directly to me with an intensity that made something cold settle in my stomach. Before we address the quarterly performance, Richard continued, we need to discuss a personnel matter that has direct bearing on our strategic direction. The phrasing was unusual. Personnel matters were typically handled privately, or at least addressed in executive sessions without the full board present. I glanced at Marcus, looking for some signal about what was happening, but he was still focused on his phone with studied determination. Sophia, Richard said, and the use of my first name without any softening courtesy felt deliberately dismissive. You've been serving as Director of Digital Innovation for 3 years now. During that time, you've been given considerable resources and latitude to develop initiatives meant to modernize our technology infrastructure and market positioning. I nodded, uncertain whether he expected verbal response. The statement was factually accurate, but the tone carried criticism that I could not yet identify the source of. The board has reviewed the results of those initiatives, Richard continued, and I'm afraid the conclusion is unavoidable. The return on investment has been substantially below projections. The digital transformation project you've been championing has consumed millions of dollars in development costs, while delivering minimal measurable impact on our competitive position or revenue growth. The accusation landed like a physical blow. I had prepared for questions about timeline or scope adjustments. I had anticipated requests for additional data about user adoption metrics or customer satisfaction improvements. I had not prepared for complete dismissal of 3 years of work that had demonstrably improved our technology capabilities and market perception. That's not accurate, I said, keeping my voice level despite the adrenaline beginning to flood my system. The Digital Transformation Initiative has already improved our customer retention by 12% and reduced our operational costs by $8 million annually. The full revenue impact won't be apparent until the enterprise clients we've been courting through the enhanced platform complete their evaluation cycles, but every indicator suggests we're positioned to capture significant market share in segments we couldn't effectively compete in before. Richard's expression did not change. He simply reached for a leather portfolio that had been sitting closed beside his notepad and extracted a bound report that looked official and damning. This independent analysis commissioned by the board tells a different story, Richard said, sliding the report across the table toward me. The consultants found that your initiatives have been poorly conceived, inadequately executed, and have distracted the company from our core competencies. The technology choices you championed are already becoming obsolete. The market positioning strategy you recommended has confused our brand identity. The talent you hired has been expensive and has not integrated well with our existing culture. I stared at the report without touching it. The consulting firm's logo on the cover was one I recognized as having close ties to Jennifer's division. The timing of the analysis, the framing of the conclusions, the presence of this bound document ready for distribution all suggested that this moment had been carefully orchestrated well before I entered the room. I wasn't informed that an independent analysis was being conducted, I said, and I could hear my voice beginning to shake despite my efforts to maintain composure. I wasn't given an opportunity to provide context or respond to preliminary findings. This is the first I'm hearing that my work is being questioned at this level. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to evaluate all major initiatives objectively, Richard replied, and the corporate language felt like a weapon being deployed against me. Your personal involvement in the initiatives made it inappropriate to include you in the evaluation process. We needed unbiased assessment free from the defensiveness that people naturally feel about their own work. Around the table, executives who had praised my presentations months earlier were now studying their notes or staring at the table surface. No one met my eyes. No one offered any indication that they disagreed with the characterization being presented. The silence felt coordinated, like everyone in the room had been briefed before I arrived about what would happen and had agreed to let it proceed without interference. The conclusion, Richard said, and his tone shifted into something that sounded almost regretful but felt performative, is that we need to make a leadership change in the Digital Innovation Division. Effective immediately, your position is being eliminated as part of a broader restructuring of how we approach technology initiatives. We'll be integrating those functions into existing departments under more experienced leadership. The words took several seconds to fully process. Position eliminated. Effective immediately. The phrases that meant termination delivered in the language of corporate restructuring that would appear in the minutes as strategic evolution rather than personal failure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're firing me," I said, and I was distantly proud that my voice came out steady even as my hands clenched together under the table hard enough that my nails cut into my palms. "We're making a difficult but necessary business decision," Richard corrected, as if the distinction mattered. "You'll receive a generous severance package, of course. 6 months' salary plus continuation of benefits through the end of the year. We recognize that you put considerable effort into your work here, even if the results didn't meet our expectations." 6 months' salary. The amount that sounded generous to people who did not understand that my reputation in the industry would be destroyed by being publicly terminated from my father-in-law's company. The amount that ignored the equity I had been promised but had not yet vested, the bonuses I had been told would be substantial if my initiative succeeded, the career trajectory that was being cut off before I could demonstrate the full value of what I had built. I looked at Marcus again, silently begging him to say something, to defend my work, to at least acknowledge that his father was destroying his wife's career in front of 24 witnesses. Marcus finally looked up from his phone, met my eyes for half a second, and then glanced away toward his father with an expression I could not read. "Marcus," I said, and I heard the desperation in my own voice. "You know the digital transformation project is working. You've seen the customer feedback. You've reviewed the operational efficiency data. Tell them this analysis is wrong." Marcus shifted in his seat, uncomfortable but not uncomfortable enough to act. When he spoke, his voice carried the carefully neutral tone of someone who had rehearsed what he would say. "Sophia, I think we have to trust the independent evaluation," he said. "I know you worked hard, but maybe this just wasn't the right fit for your skill set. It's not personal. It's just business." The betrayal of those words struck harder than Richard's announcement. My husband was sitting in a board meeting endorsing my termination, reducing 3 years of 80-hour weeks to a poor fit, dismissing my competence as inadequate while maintaining the calm demeanor of someone discussing quarterly projections. I had known our marriage was struggling, had recognized for months that something fundamental had broken between us, but I had not understood until this moment that he would actively participate in my professional destruction. "This is because I filed the complaint," I said, and the moment the words left my mouth I knew I had made a tactical error by saying it in front of the full board. But the reality had crystallized with sudden clarity and I could not hold it back. I reported the harassment from the VP of Sales, and suddenly my work is being independently evaluated and found inadequate. This is retaliation. Richard's expression hardened into something cold and dismissive. "That's an extremely serious accusation, Sophia, and it's completely unfounded. The evaluation of your performance has nothing to do with the HR complaint you filed, which was thoroughly investigated and resolved. I'd advise you to be very careful about making defamatory statements, particularly given that we're treating you quite fairly in this difficult situation." The HR investigation had been a joke. I had reported that the VP of Sales had made repeated inappropriate comments about my appearance, had touched my shoulder and back during conversations despite clear requests to stop, and had sent late-night messages that had nothing to do with business. The investigation consisted of one conversation with an HR representative, who seemed more concerned about protecting the company than addressing the behavior. The VP received a verbal warning that went into no permanent record. I received advice to be less sensitive about normal workplace interactions. 2 weeks later, the independent analysis of my work was commissioned. "You're making a mistake," I said, addressing Richard but speaking to the entire room. "The Digital Transformation Initiative is positioning this company to compete effectively in markets that will define the industry's future. Abandoning it now, before the enterprise deal's close, before the full market impact is visible, will cost you opportunities worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You'll realize that in 6 months when competitors using similar strategies start capturing the clients we should have won." "We appreciate your perspective," Richard said, in the tone that meant the discussion was over. "But the decision has been made. Security is waiting outside to escort you to collect your personal belongings. We'll need your building access card, company laptop and phone before you leave. The presence of security waiting outside meant they had anticipated I might cause a scene, might refuse to leave quietly, might need to be physically removed from the building. The humiliation of that assumption, the image of myself being escorted out like someone who could not be trusted to behave professionally, made rage and shame burn through me in equal measure. I stood slowly, my legs shaking but still supporting my weight. Every eye in the room was on me now, watching to see how I would handle this moment, whether I would break down or make threats or simply comply with the corporate execution I had just witnessed. This company, I said quietly, addressing Richard but including everyone at the table in my gaze, is going to regret this decision more than you can possibly imagine right now. Not because I'm going to sue you, although you've given me grounds. Not because I'm going to damage your reputation, although I could. But because you just made the catastrophic error of underestimating what I'm capable of building when I'm not constrained by your limited vision and your need to maintain control over everything around you. Richard's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement. I wish you well in your future endeavors, Sophia. Truly. I hope you find a role that better matches your abilities. The dismissiveness in his tone was deliberate and cutting. He was not threatened by my words. He viewed me as a minor irritation being removed from his organization, not as someone capable of meaningful competition or consequence. I gathered my presentation materials from the table, not because I would need them but because I refused to leave them behind like abandoned evidence of failure. The leather portfolio that held my notes felt heavier than it should, weighted with the knowledge that everything I had built here was being dismantled before the value could fully materialize. The walk from the boardroom to my office with the security guard trailing 3 steps behind me was the longest journey of my professional life. People looked up from their desks as I passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to pity to carefully maintained neutrality. News traveled fast in corporate environments. By the time I reached my office on the 36th floor, half the building probably knew that Richard Hartwell's daughter-in-law had just been terminated. My office was modest compared to executive suites, but it was mine. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held industry publications and technology references. The walls displayed whiteboards covered with strategic diagrams and project timelines that represented hundreds of hours of planning. My desk held dual monitors, a mechanical keyboard I had purchased myself because I preferred the tactile feedback, and a framed photograph from my wedding day that I now recognized as documentation of the biggest mistake I had ever made. The security guard stood in the doorway with a cardboard box, watching as I gathered personal belongings. I took the books that were mine, the few decorative items I had brought from home, the awards from my previous positions before joining Hartwell Technologies. I left the company-issued technology on the desk. I left the whiteboards untouched, preserving the strategic work that Richard claimed was worthless, but that I knew represented genuine innovation. The photograph from my wedding day I left face down on the desk. Marcus could dispose of it himself. 20 minutes later, I walked out of Hartwell Technologies carrying a cardboard box that held the physical remnants of 3 years of my career. The security guard escorted me all the way to the parking garage, ensured I reached my car, waited while I loaded the box into the back seat. The message was clear. I was not trusted. I was not welcome. I was not part of this organization anymore. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 15 minutes before I could make myself turn the key in the ignition. My hands were shaking. My breath came in short, sharp gasps that I could not quite control. The humiliation of what had just happened washed over me in waves that made my vision blur, and my chest tighten with the kind of rage and grief that had nowhere productive to go. My phone buzzed with a text message. For one irrational moment I thought it might be Marcus, might be some acknowledgement of what had just occurred, might be an apology or explanation or at least recognition that his silence in that boardroom had ended whatever remained of our marriage. The message was from my best friend Rachel, who worked in a different division of the company and had clearly already heard what happened. "Are you okay? I just heard. This is insane. Call me when you can." I stared at the message without responding. I did not have words yet for what I was feeling, could not articulate the combination of rage and humiliation and grief and strange electric anticipation that was beginning to cut through the initial shock. Richard Hartwell thought he had removed a problem from his organization. He thought he had corrected a strategic mistake by hiring his son's wife into a role she was not qualified for. He thought the story ended with me leaving his building carrying a cardboard box and a severance check. He had no idea what he had actually done. He had just freed me from every constraint of family obligation, corporate politics, and the need to make my ideas fit within his limited vision of what was possible. He had just given me the motivation and the clarity I needed to build something that would not just compete with Hartwell Technologies, but would make his company irrelevant in the markets that mattered. 6 months, I thought, gripping the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles went white. Give me 6 months and I will show you exactly what I am capable of when you are not controlling every decision and claiming credit for every success. I started the car and pulled out of the parking garage into the gray Seattle morning, leaving Hartwell Technologies behind me for the last time as an employee. The next time I entered that building, it would be as the CEO of their most dangerous competitor, and Richard Hartwell would understand far too late that the biggest mistake of his career was not recognizing my value when he had the chance to benefit from it. The revenge would not be dramatic or immediate. It would be systematic, strategic, and absolutely devastating. And it started the moment I drove away from that parking garage with nothing but a cardboard box and a vision for the future that his limited imagination could never have conceived. I drove home through midday Seattle traffic in a daze, the windshield wipers beating a rhythm against spring rain that matched the pounding in my temples. The apartment Marcus and I shared was in Belltown, a modern high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and amenities that had seemed impressive when we signed the lease 3 years ago. Now the marble lobby and the concierge who greeted me by name felt like artifacts from someone else's life, belonging to a version of myself who had believed that marriage to Marcus Hartwell meant partnership, and that working for Richard Hartwell meant opportunity. The apartment was empty when I entered. Marcus would be at the office for hours yet, probably already in meetings where my termination would be discussed in careful corporate language that sanitized what had actually happened. I set the cardboard box on the dining table and stood looking at it for a long moment. This container of personal effects that represented the physical evidence of professional failure. 3 years of 18-hour days, of strategic thinking and careful relationship building and genuine innovation, reduced to objects that fit in a box I could carry with one hand. My phone had been buzzing steadily during the drive home. Text messages from colleagues who had heard what happened, some offering support and others carefully worded to maintain professional distance from someone who had just been publicly terminated. I ignored all of them except one from Rachel that simply said she was coming over and would bring wine. I changed out of the business suit I had chosen so carefully that morning, selecting clothes that conveyed competence and authority for a board presentation I would never give. I pulled on jeans and a sweater that belonged to the person I had been before business school, before Marcus, before Hartwell Technologies. The woman who looked back at me from the bedroom mirror was 32 years old with dark circles under her eyes, and an expression that oscillated between rage and something dangerously close to despair. Rachel arrived 40 minutes later with 2 bottles of expensive red wine and takeout from the Thai restaurant we had discovered during my first month in Seattle. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug that lasted long enough for something tight in my chest to finally crack open. I did not cry. The tears would not come yet. But I held on to my best friend and let myself feel the full weight of what had happened without trying to maintain professional composure or strategic thinking. We sat on the floor of my living room with wine glasses and pad thai while I recounted the board meeting in detail. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker as I described Richard's prepared report, the security guard waiting outside, Marcus's studied neutrality as his father destroyed my career. "That absolute bastard," Rachel said when I finished, and I was not entirely sure whether she meant Richard or Marcus. Probably both. "This was coordinated. They planned this whole thing specifically to humiliate you in the most public way possible." "The question is why?" I said, taking a long drink of wine that was probably too expensive to be consumed this quickly. "I mean, yes, there is the harassment complaint, but Richard could have quietly moved me to a different role or managed me out over time. Why the public execution?" Rachel was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in her glass with the kind of focused attention that meant she was thinking through implications. Rachel Chun had been my closest friend since we met during orientation at Stanford Business School 8 years ago. She was brilliant with organizational dynamics and corporate politics in ways that I had never quite mastered, seeing patterns in human behavior that I often missed while focusing on strategy and execution. You were getting too much visibility, Rachel said finally. I have been watching this happen over the past 6 months. The trade publications were writing about your digital transformation initiative. You got invited to speak at that industry conference in Austin. The CTO of that enterprise client we have been courting mentioned you specifically in his evaluation comments. You were building a reputation that existed independently of the Hartwell name. I had not connected those dots before, but Rachel was right. The speaking invitation had come from conference organizers who were specifically interested in innovative approaches to legacy system modernization. The trade publication interviews had focused on my strategic framework rather than on Hartwell Technologies as a company. I had been developing my own professional brand, and in Richard's world where he controlled the narrative about everything that happened in his organization, that independence represented threat. Richard does not allow anyone to outshine him, Rachel continued. And he definitely does not allow women to build power bases inside his company. Look at the executive team composition. Jennifer is the only woman in senior leadership, and she got there by being more ruthless than any of the men and by never challenging her father on anything that matters. You were not playing that game. You were trying to do excellent work and letting the results speak for themselves. Stupid of me, I said bitterly. Not stupid, Rachel corrected firmly. Operating with integrity in a system designed to punish it. There is a difference. We drank wine and ate pad thai while Rachel filled me in on the corporate gossip I had missed by being terminated before lunch. Apparently the independent analysis that Richard had cited so confidently in the board meeting was indeed commissioned by Jennifer's division, conducted by consultants who had a standing contract with Hartwell Technologies and therefore had every incentive to deliver findings that aligned with executive preferences. The report had been completed 2 weeks ago, but held until this morning's board meeting for maximum dramatic impact. Jennifer has been positioning herself to absorb your division's budget and headcount, Rachel explained. She argued that digital transformation should be part of enterprise sales strategy, rather than a separate function. Your termination clears the way for her to claim credit for any deals that close using the platform you built while blaming any problems on your poor foundation work. The political maneuvering made sense, but it still felt surreal that my career had been sacrificed to facilitate Jennifer's internal empire building. I had known that Hartwell Technologies operated with the kind of corporate politics that valued positioning over performance, but I had believed that demonstrable results would provide some protection. I had been wrong about that along with so much else. What are you going to do? Rachel asked as we opened the second bottle of wine. I have no idea, I admitted. I mean, I will start looking for positions, reaching out to my network, but getting fired from your father-in-law's company is not exactly the career narrative that recruiters want to hear. And Marcus. I stopped, not sure how to articulate what I was feeling about my husband's betrayal. Marcus is a coward who has been riding his father's reputation his entire life, Rachel said bluntly. He sat in that meeting and said nothing while Richard destroyed you because he has never stood up to his father about anything that matters. He will come home tonight and try to convince you that this was just business, that you are overreacting, that you should be grateful for the severance package. And you are going to tell him to get out. We are married, I said, even though the words felt hollow. You are married to someone who let his father fire you in front of 20 witnesses without saying a word in your defense, Rachel countered. That is not a marriage, Sophia. That is a legal arrangement that benefits him and costs you everything. Before I could respond, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. Seattle area code, but not one saved in my contacts. I almost declined the call, but something made me answer. Ms. Reeves. A woman's voice, professional and precise. This is Diana Chun calling from Meridian Ventures. I apologize for the cold call, but I was hoping I could speak with you about a time-sensitive opportunity. Meridian Ventures was a venture capital firm I knew by reputation. Mid-sized, focused on enterprise technology, known for making smart bets on B2B software companies that bigger firms overlooked. I had read profiles of their managing partners in industry publications, but had never had reason to contact them directly. I am listening, I said cautiously, glancing at Rachel with raised eyebrows. I understand you departed from Hartwell Technologies today, Diana continued, and the fact that she already knew meant she had excellent information networks. I have been following your work on the digital transformation initiative for some time. The trade publication coverage caught my attention, and I have been watching the platform development with interest. I would like to discuss a potential partnership that I think you will find compelling. What kind of partnership? I asked. The kind where you take everything you learn building technology for Hartwell and build it properly for yourself, Diana said. I would prefer to discuss the details in person rather than over the phone. Would you be available to meet tomorrow morning? I can come to you or we can meet at my office downtown, whichever you prefer. The timing was suspicious. I had been terminated less than 6 hours ago, and a venture capitalist was already calling about partnership opportunities. Either Diana had remarkable intelligence about internal Hartwell dynamics or something else was happening that I did not fully understand yet. How did you know I left Hartwell today? I asked directly. Diana laughed, a warm sound that diffused some of my suspicion. I have coffee scheduled twice a month with Sharon Martinez, who sits on Hartwell's board. She texted me this afternoon suggesting I might want to reach out to you before other firms realized you were available. Sharon thought what happened in that board meeting was unconscionable, and she wanted to make sure you had options. Sharon Martinez was one of 3 independent board members at Hartwell Technologies, a former CTO who had built and sold 2 enterprise software companies before moving into board advisory roles. She had asked intelligent questions during my previous presentations and had seemed genuinely interested in the digital transformation strategy. Apparently, she had also been paying attention to the corporate dynamics that led to my termination. Tomorrow morning works, I said, making the decision quickly before I could second-guess it. Your office, 9 o'clock? Perfect, Diana said. I will send you the address and parking information. And Ms. Reeves? What happened today was not about your competence or the quality of your work. Richard Hartwell made a catastrophic strategic error, and he does not even realize it yet. I am looking forward to helping you show him exactly how catastrophic. After she hung up, Rachel was looking at me with an expression that combined excitement and concern. Diana Chun from Meridian Ventures just called you 6 hours after you got fired to talk about partnership opportunities? Apparently so, I said, still processing the conversation. Sophia, do you understand what this means? Rachel leaned forward with intensity. Meridian does not make random calls. If Diana is reaching out this quickly with this much interest, she has been watching you for a while and she sees something specific she wants to back. This could be the intervention you need. I wanted to feel excited about the possibility, but mostly I felt exhausted and wary. The last time someone had offered me an opportunity that seemed too good to refuse, I had ended up married to Marcus and working for Richard. I was not eager to repeat that pattern of misplaced trust. I will take the meeting, I said. But I am not making any decisions until I understand exactly what she wants and why. Rachel stayed until nearly 10 o'clock, until the wine was gone and we had exhausted immediate speculation about what Diana might propose. When she left, she hugged me hard and made me promise to text her after the meeting tomorrow. I locked the door behind her and stood in my living room looking at the city lights spread out below my windows, feeling untethered and strangely calm. Marcus came home just after 11. His key turning in the lock with the careful quietness of someone who was not sure what reception awaited him. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop open, already researching Meridian Ventures' portfolio companies and investment thesis. I did not look up when he entered. Sophia, he said, and I could hear the careful modulation in his voice, the tone he used when he was trying to de-escalate conflict. We should talk about what happened today. Should we? I closed my laptop and looked at him directly. What exactly do you want to say, Marcus? That it was just business? That I should not take it personally? That your father made a difficult decision and you support him? He flinched slightly but maintained his position near the door, not moving closer into the room. It was not personal, he said. The board genuinely had concerns about the ROI on your initiatives. The independent analysis raised valid questions that needed to be addressed. The independent analysis that was commissioned by your sister without my knowledge, conducted by consultants with financial incentive to deliver findings that aligned with executive preferences, and presented in a board meeting where I was given no opportunity to respond to the conclusions? I kept my voice level. That independent analysis? You are being paranoid, Marcus said, and the dismissiveness in his tone made rage flash through me hot and sharp. Not everything is a conspiracy against you. Sometimes performance just does not meet expectations. I stood up slowly, maintaining eye contact. You sat in that meeting while your father fired me in front of 20 executives. You said nothing in my defense. You endorsed my termination and suggested it was not a good fit for my skill set. And now you are standing in our living room telling me I am paranoid for thinking this was politically motivated? What did you expect me to do? Marcus's voice rose slightly, frustration breaking through his careful control. Contradict my father in front of the entire board? Undermine his authority in his own company? That would have been career suicide for me. So you chose your career over your wife, I said quietly. You made that calculation and decided I was expendable. That is not fair, Marcus protested. You are making this into something it is not. I am sorry that you are upset, but this was a business decision that had nothing to do with our marriage. The sheer obtuseness of that statement would have been funny if it had not been so devastating. Marcus genuinely seemed to believe that participating in my professional destruction had no bearing on our personal relationship, that he could separate his role as Richard's son from his role as my husband without consequence. I want you to leave, I said. What? Marcus looked genuinely surprised. Sophia, you are overreacting. Let's talk about this rationally tomorrow when you have had time to process. I am being completely rational, I said. You betrayed me in the most public way possible. You sat silent while your father humiliated me, and then you came home expecting what, sympathy? Understanding? You want me to comfort you for the difficult position you were put in when you had to choose between your father's approval and your wife's career? Where am I supposed to go? Marcus asked, and the practical question revealed exactly how little he understood about what he had done. I genuinely do not care, I said. Go to your father's house. Go to Jennifer's. Go to a hotel. But you are not staying here tonight. We stared at each other across the living room. For years of marriage and 6 years of relationship collapsing into the space between us. I could see him calculating whether to push back, whether to assert his equal right to the apartment we jointly leased, whether to try to convince me I was being unreasonable. Whatever he saw in my expression made him decide against all of those options. Fine, he said coldly. I will stay at the Fairmont tonight. But we are going to discuss this like adults tomorrow when you are thinking clearly. He packed an overnight bag from the bedroom while I sat on the couch refusing to watch him move through the apartment. When he left, the door closing behind him with deliberate quietness, I felt something release in my chest that I had not realized I was holding tight. I was alone in the apartment for the first time since the morning. Alone with the wreckage of my career and my marriage. Alone with rage and grief, and the strange electric anticipation that had been building since Diana Chen's phone call. I opened my laptop and returned to researching Meridian Ventures. Diana had been a partner there for 7 years after selling her own enterprise software company for $200 million. Her investment thesis focused on B2B platforms that solve genuine operational problems, rather than chasing consumer trends. She had a reputation for backing female founders, and for being hands-on with portfolio companies during critical growth phases. The companies in Meridian's portfolio were impressive. 3 exits in the past 5 years with returns that made the firm's reputation. Current holdings included 2 companies that had recently raised Series B funding at valuations above $100 million. If Diana was interested in backing something I wanted to build, she had the capital and the expertise to make it happen. But what did I want to build? I opened a new document on my laptop and started writing. Not a business plan yet, but an articulation of everything I had learned at Hartwell Technologies that Richard would never let me implement. The technology architecture that could truly modernize legacy enterprise systems. The go-to-market strategy that would appeal to companies struggling with digital transformation. The pricing model that would make sophisticated capabilities accessible to mid-market clients who could not afford traditional enterprise software. I wrote for 3 hours until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned from staring at the screen. When I finally stopped, I had 15 pages of notes that represented the foundation of something that could actually work. Not a revenge fantasy, but a legitimate business opportunity that I could execute better than anyone else, because I had learned from watching Hartwell Technologies fail to capitalize on the exact market shift I was describing. At 2 in the morning, I finally went to bed. I lay awake in the darkness listening to the ambient noise of the city, thinking about Diana's phone call and Marcus's betrayal and Richard's mistake. He thought he had removed a problem from his organization. He had actually created his most dangerous competitor. And tomorrow morning I would take the first step toward proving it. I slept fitfully, my dreams filled with board meetings and presentations that kept shifting into scenarios where I could not make myself heard. I woke at 6 feeling more tired than when I had gone to bed, but also clear-headed in a way I had not been in months. The fog of trying to make my marriage work and trying to succeed at Hartwell despite the corporate politics had lifted, leaving brutal clarity about what I needed to do next. I dressed carefully for the meeting with Diana, choosing clothes that conveyed competence without the corporate formality that now felt associated with Hartwell. I reviewed my notes from last night, refining the core ideas into something I could articulate clearly in conversation. By the time I left for downtown Seattle at 8:15, I felt prepared and focused in ways that yesterday's board meeting had not allowed me to be. Meridian Ventures occupied the 23rd floor of a building that overlooked Elliott Bay. The office aesthetic was deliberately casual, with open workspace and glass-walled conference rooms and technology that looked current rather than designed to impress. Diana met me in the reception area herself rather than sending an assistant, a small gesture that suggested she viewed this meeting as significant. Diana Chun was in her early 40s, dressed in dark jeans and a blazer that split the difference between venture capital professional and technology founder. She greeted me with a firm handshake and direct eye contact that immediately put me more at ease than I had expected to feel. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Diana said as she led me to a conference room with a view of the water. "I know yesterday was difficult, and you are probably still processing what happened. I appreciate you being willing to explore this conversation despite the circumstances." We settled into chairs at the conference table. Diana had a leather portfolio in front of her, but she did not open it immediately, instead focusing her attention entirely on me in a way that felt rare and valuable. "Before we discuss business opportunities," Diana said, "I want to acknowledge what happened to you yesterday. I have worked in technology for 20 years and I have watched talented women be systematically undermined and pushed out of organizations by men who felt threatened by their competence. What Richard Hartwell did was unconscionable, and it reflects his own insecurity rather than any legitimate assessment of your capabilities." The validation landed with unexpected force. I had not realized how much I needed to hear someone with Diana's credibility explicitly state that my termination was about politics rather than performance. "Sharon Martinez sent me the independent analysis that Richard cited in the board meeting," Diana continued. "I had my team review it last night. It is garbage, Sophia. Methodologically flawed, selectively interpreting data to support predetermined conclusions, ignoring the most significant performance metrics that demonstrate your initiatives were working exactly as designed. Anyone with genuine expertise in enterprise software could see through it immediately." "Richard did not care whether it was accurate," I said. "He cared that it gave him justification to remove me with board support." "Exactly," Diana agreed. "Which tells me he was either threatened by your growing reputation, or he needed to clear the way for Jennifer to absorb your division's resources. Probably both. Regardless of his motivations, he made a catastrophic strategic error and created an opportunity for us to capitalize on." She opened her portfolio and extracted a bound document that looked similar to the analysis Richard had used against me but thicker and more professionally produced. "This is preliminary market research my team conducted over the past month," Diana said, sliding it across the table toward me. "We have been tracking the enterprise digital transformation market, and we identified a significant gap that existing solutions are not adequately addressing. Mid-market companies need the sophistication of enterprise platforms, but they cannot afford the implementation costs or the ongoing licensing fees that traditional providers charge. There is a massive opportunity for a platform that delivers enterprise capabilities at a price point and with an implementation model that works for companies with limited technology budgets and staff." I opened the document and scanned the executive summary. The market sizing was substantial, the competitive analysis was thorough, and the opportunity description matched almost exactly what I had been trying to build at Hartwell before Richard had shut it down. "This is what I was building," I said quietly. "This is the exact market opportunity one presented to the board 6 months ago, when I asked for additional budget to develop a mid-market offering. Richard rejected it because he said it would cannibalize our enterprise business and dilute the brand. Richard was protecting his existing revenue streams rather than building for future growth, Diana said. Classic incumbent's dilemma. He cannot disrupt himself, so he will be disrupted by someone else. That someone could be you. She let that statement hang in the air while I processed the implications. Diana was not offering me a job, or even suggesting I consult for an existing portfolio company. She was proposing that I build a company from scratch to execute on the exact strategy Hartwell had rejected. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. I am proposing that Meridian lead a seed round of $3 million to fund the initial development and market validation of a platform that does exactly what you described in your Hartwell presentations, Diana said. You would be founder and CEO. You would have full control over product strategy, hiring, and go-to-market approach. Meridian would provide capital, strategic guidance, and access to our network of potential customers and partners. We would take a significant equity stake, but you would maintain founder control and majority ownership. $3 million in seed funding with founder control and majority ownership. The offer was extraordinary, the kind of terms that founders spent months negotiating and often never achieved. Diana was essentially offering to back me to build the exact company that Hartwell should have built but Richard's limited vision had prevented. Why me? I asked directly. You could recruit any number of experienced enterprise software executives with longer track records and fewer complications from having just been publicly fired. Diana smiled slightly. I could recruit experienced executives who would build a careful incremental product that would not threaten existing market leaders. You are going to build something that fundamentally changes the competitive dynamics because you understand exactly what the incumbents are doing wrong and you have personal motivation to prove they made a mistake. I do not want careful and incremental, Sophia. I want disruptive and transformative. You are uniquely positioned to deliver that. The vision she was articulating matched what I had been thinking about during those 3 hours of writing last night. Not just a company that competed with Hartwell Technologies, but a company that made their approach to digital transformation obsolete. What is the timeline? I asked. We could have term sheets ready by end of week, Diana said. First capital deployed within 2 weeks. You could be hiring your founding team by early April and have a development roadmap finalized before the end of the month. 6 months from now you could have a minimum viable product in market validation with early customers. 12 months from now you could be raising series of funding based on demonstrated traction. 6 months from now. Exactly the timeline I had given myself during that drive home from Hartwell yesterday. 6 months to build something that would show Richard his mistake. I need to think about this, I said, even though every instinct was screaming at me to accept immediately. Of course, Diana said. This is a major decision and you should take the time you need. I would suggest talking to some of the founders in our portfolio, getting their perspective on what partnership with Meridian actually looks like. I will send you contact information for 3 CEOs who I think would give you honest assessment. We spent another hour discussing the practical details of what building the company would actually involve. Diana asked intelligent questions about my technical vision, my understanding of the target market, my thoughts on team composition and go-to-market strategy. The conversation felt collaborative rather than evaluative, like we were already partners working through the strategic challenges together. When I left Meridian's office at 11:30, I felt more energized than I had in months. The humiliation of yesterday's board meeting was still raw, but it was now contextualized as the catalyst for something potentially extraordinary rather than simply as professional failure. I called Rachel from my car in the parking garage. She answered on the first ring. How did it go? Rachel asked immediately. She offered me $3 million in seed funding to build the exact company Hartwell should have built, I said. Founder control, majority ownership, full strategic autonomy. Rachel let out a long whistle. Sophia, do you understand what this means? Diana Chun does not make offers like that casually. She sees something in you and she is willing to back it with real capital. I know, I said. I just need to make sure I am making this decision for the right reasons, and not just because I am angry and want revenge. Why can't it be both? Rachel asked. You can want to prove Richard wrong and also genuinely believe you can build something valuable. Those motivations are not mutually exclusive. She was right. The best revenge would not be destruction of Hartwell Technologies, but the creation of something so successful that my departure would be recognized as Richard's catastrophic failure of judgment. I am going to do it, I said, and hearing myself say the words out loud made them real in a way that thinking them had not. Good, Rachel said firmly. Now go home and start planning your company. You have a technology empire to build. I drove home through Seattle traffic feeling the weight and possibility of what I was about to undertake. Building a company from scratch would consume everything I had. It would require sacrifices and risk and years of grinding work with no guarantee of success. It would mean confronting every doubt I had about my own capabilities and proving to myself and everyone who had underestimated me that I could execute at the highest level. But it also meant freedom from Richard's control, from corporate politics, from having to make my vision fit within someone else's limited imagination. When I reached my apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up the notes from last night. 15 pages that needed to become a business plan, a product roadmap, a fundraising strategy, and a company that would change the enterprise software market. 6 months from now, Richard Hartwell would understand exactly what he had lost when he fired me from that boardroom. And I would be just getting started. The coffee shop where I met the first Meridian portfolio founder was in Capitol Hill, deliberately chosen as neutral territory away from downtown tech circles where conversations might be overheard and speculation might begin before I was ready. Elena Rodriguez arrived exactly on time, a woman in her late 30s with the kind of focused energy that suggested she was perpetually managing 17 priorities simultaneously and thriving on the pressure. Elena had founded Cloudmetrics 4 years ago with Meridian seed funding, and had grown it into a Series B company valued at $180 million. Her platform helped enterprises monitor and optimize cloud infrastructure spending, solving a problem that had become critical as companies moved operations off legacy systems. She was exactly the kind of successful founder I needed to understand whether Diana's offer represented genuine opportunity or simply looked attractive, because I was desperate for validation after yesterday's humiliation. We ordered coffee and settled into a corner table where Elena opened her laptop and pulled up a presentation that looked like it had been assembled specifically for this conversation. The first slide showed Cloudmetrics' growth trajectory over 4 years, revenue climbing from 0 to $42 million annually with customer acquisition costs declining steadily as the platform proved its value. Diana sent me your background, Elena said without preamble. What happened at Hartwell was garbage and Richard is going to regret it. But you did not ask to meet me, so I could validate your feelings about getting fired. You want to know whether Meridian is actually the partner Diana presented, or whether there are complications I wish someone had warned me about before I signed term sheets. The directness was refreshing after years of corporate doublespeak at Hartwell. Exactly that, I confirmed. Diana's offer sounds extraordinary, but I have been burned by things that sounded too good to be true. I need honest assessment from someone who has actually worked with her. Elena took a long drink of her coffee and seemed to be deciding how much candor was appropriate for someone she had just met. Whatever calculation she made came down on the side of brutal honesty. Diana will be the best partner you ever have and also the most demanding, Elena began. She will push you harder than you think is reasonable, and she will hold you accountable to commitments you make even when circumstances change and executing becomes difficult. She will not accept excuses about market conditions or technical challenges or team dynamics. She will expect you to solve problems rather than explaining why they cannot be solved. I nodded, making notes on my phone about the specific phrasing Elena was using. This matched what I had read about Diana's reputation, but hearing it from someone who had experienced the partnership directly carried more weight. She will also give you resources and connections that would take you years to build on your own, Elena continued. When I needed to hire a VP of engineering and was struggling to find someone with the right combination of technical depth and startup experience, Diana introduced me to 3 qualified candidates within a week. 2 of them are still with the company. When we were negotiating our first major enterprise contract, and the customer was pushing back on terms, Diana called their CFO directly and vouched for our capabilities. We closed the deal. Elena pulled up another slide showing Cloudmetrics' cap table evolution across funding rounds. Meridian's ownership had been diluted from 35% at seed to 18% after Series B, but Diana had maintained her board seat and remained actively involved in strategic decisions. The equity structure Diana is offering you is consistent with how she approached our seed round, Elena said. She takes significant ownership because she is providing meaningful capital, and she wants alignment of incentives. But she protects founder control because she genuinely believes that the person building the company should have authority to make strategic decisions. I have never felt like Meridian was trying to take over cloud metrics or push me in directions I did not want to go. We spent 90 minutes walking through Elena's experience with specific situations where Diana's involvement had been valuable, and other situations where her demanding standards had created tension. The picture that emerged was nuanced but ultimately positive. Diana was not an easy partner, but she was an effective one, and her track record of successful exits suggested she understood how to build value in enterprise software companies. The question you should be asking yourself, Elena said as we finished our coffee, is whether you are prepared for what building a company actually requires. It is not just longer hours than you worked at Hartwell. It is complete psychological ownership of every problem that emerges. When customers are unhappy, when employees quit, when technology breaks, when competitors undercut your pricing, all of it lands on you as founder. There is no corporate structure to absorb the pressure. Diana will support you, but she will not shield you from the reality that success or failure is ultimately your responsibility. The warning was not discouragement but reality check, and I appreciated the honesty. I understand, I said. Or at least I understand intellectually. I am sure the emotional reality will be more intense than I am anticipating. It always is, Elena agreed. But if you are doing this for the right reasons, if you genuinely believe in the problem you are solving and the value you can create, then the intensity becomes fuel rather than burden. You are going to have moments where you question whether this was a catastrophic mistake. Everyone does. The question is whether you have enough conviction to push through those moments. After Elena left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour reviewing my notes and thinking about what conviction actually meant in this context. Was I building a company because I believed in the market opportunity and thought I could execute better than existing competitors? Or was I building a company because Richard had humiliated me and I wanted to prove he was wrong? The honest answer was both, and I needed to be clear with myself about how those motivations would interact as the company developed. I met with 2 other Meridian portfolio founders over the next 3 days. Both conversations reinforced what Elena had articulated. Diana was demanding but supportive, focused on long-term value creation rather than short-term metrics, and genuinely committed to helping founders succeed. The consistency of their descriptions suggested I was getting accurate assessment rather than carefully managed references. By Friday morning, I had made my decision. I called Diana and told her I was ready to move forward with term sheets. Excellent, Diana said, and I could hear genuine satisfaction in her voice. I will have our attorneys draft documents and send them to you by Monday. In the meantime, I want you to start thinking about your founding team. You cannot build this company alone, and your early hires will determine whether you succeed or fail. I have some thoughts about profiles you should prioritize, but I want to hear your thinking first. We spent an hour on the phone discussing the critical roles I would need to fill immediately versus capabilities I could add later as the company grew. I needed a technical co-founder who could architect the platform and lead engineering. I needed a head of product who understood enterprise software and could translate customer needs into development priorities. I needed someone who could handle operations and finance, so I could focus on strategy and fundraising. Everything else could wait until we had product market fit and initial customers. I am going to introduce you to 3 people next week, Diana said. 2 potential technical co-founders and 1 product leader. All of them have enterprise software experience and all of them are currently looking for their next opportunity. No promises that any of them will be the right fit, but they are worth conversations. After hanging up with Diana, I opened a new document and started drafting the company vision in language I could use for recruiting. This needed to be compelling enough to convince talented people to leave stable positions and join a startup that existed only as idea and seed funding. It needed to articulate the problem we were solving, the approach we were taking, and the market opportunity we were pursuing in ways that demonstrated we could actually succeed. I wrote for 3 hours, refining the pitch until it captured both the practical business opportunity and the larger vision about democratizing enterprise technology capabilities for mid-market companies. When I finally had something I was satisfied with, I sent it to Rachel and asked for feedback. She called me within 20 minutes. This is good, Sophia. Really good. You are not just describing a product, you are articulating a movement. Companies reading this will see themselves in the problem description, and they will want to be part of the solution. Movement might be overselling it, I said, but I was pleased by her response. You are challenging the assumption that sophisticated technology is only accessible to enterprises with massive budgets, Rachel countered. That is a movement. Mid-market companies have been told for decades that they have to accept inferior tools or stretch their finances to afford enterprise platforms. You are saying there is a third option and you are going to build it. That matters to a lot of people. Her enthusiasm was contagious and also validating. I had been so focused on the mechanics of building the company that I had not fully processed the larger implications of what I was attempting. If we succeeded, we would not just be building a profitable business. We would be changing the competitive dynamics of an entire market segment. Marcus called that evening for the first time since I had told him to leave the apartment. I let it go to voicemail initially, not ready to engage with whatever justifications or appeals he had prepared. When he called back 15 minutes later, I answered on the third ring. We need to talk, Marcus said without preamble. You cannot just kick me out of our apartment and refuse to communicate. We are married, Sophia. We have to deal with this situation like adults. I agree we need to talk, I said calmly. I want a divorce. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice carried shock that sounded genuine. You are not serious, he said. You are upset about what happened at work, and you are making rash decisions. Let's have dinner tomorrow and discuss this rationally. I am being completely rational, I said. You participated in my professional humiliation without defending me, or even acknowledging that what your father did was wrong. That demonstrates exactly where your loyalties lie, and it is not with me. I am not interested in remaining married to someone who will sacrifice me to maintain his position in his father's company. That is not what happened, Marcus protested. I was in an impossible position. If I had contradicted my father in that board meeting, it would have undermined his authority and damaged my credibility with the executive team. I was trying to protect my career, which ultimately benefits both of us. The fact that he still did not understand how fundamentally he had betrayed me was almost impressive in its obtuseness. Your career does not benefit me anymore, Marcus. We are done. I will have divorce papers drawn up and sent to you next week. You are making a huge mistake, Marcus said, and now anger was creeping into his voice. You are throwing away our marriage because you are hurt and embarrassed about getting fired. When you calm down and think about this clearly, you are going to regret acting so impulsively. The only thing I regret is not recognizing who you actually are before I married you, I said. Goodbye, Marcus. I hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. The conversation had been easier than I anticipated, probably because I had already processed the end of our marriage emotionally during the days since the board meeting. The legal formalities would take time, but the relationship was over in every way that mattered. Rachel came over that evening with Thai food and champagne, declaring that we were celebrating both my new company and my imminent divorce. We sat on my living room floor like we had the night I was fired, but the emotional tenor was completely different. Instead of grief and rage, I felt clarity and purpose. Tell me about the company, Rachel said as she poured champagne into glasses I had received as wedding gifts and would soon be dividing in divorce proceedings. I pulled up the vision document on my laptop and read sections aloud, watching Rachel's expression shift from interest to excitement as she absorbed what I was proposing to build. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. You are going after Hartwell directly, she observed. This platform will compete with everything they are trying to do in the mid-market segment. Eventually, I agreed. Initially, we will be too small to be on their radar. But once we establish product market fit and start signing customers that Hartwell is pursuing, Richard will notice. And by the time he realizes we are a genuine threat, we will have enough momentum that he cannot stop us. He is going to be furious, Rachel said with obvious satisfaction. Not just that you are competing with him, but that you are executing the exact strategy he rejected when you proposed it internally. Every customer you win will be evidence that he made the wrong call. We spent the rest of the evening discussing the practical details of building the company. Rachel asked intelligent questions about go-to-market strategy, pricing models, and competitive positioning that helped me refine my thinking. She also offered to introduce me to several contacts in her network who might be valuable for early customer development conversations. "I wish I could join you," Rachel said as she was leaving around midnight. "But I am 2 years away from vesting my equity at Hartwell, and I cannot afford to walk away from that. I will help however I can from the outside though." "I understand," I said, and I genuinely did. Rachel had her own financial considerations and career trajectory to manage. "Just promise me you will tell me honestly when you see me making mistakes or missing things I should be paying attention to." "Always," Rachel promised. The term sheets from Meridian arrived Monday morning as Diana had promised. I reviewed them with an attorney who specialized in venture capital transactions, someone Elena had recommended when I asked for referrals. The terms were consistent with what Diana had outlined during our meeting and favorable compared to typical seed round structures. Meridian would invest $3 million for 30% equity, valuing the company at $10 million pre-money. I would maintain majority ownership and board control, with Diana taking 1 board seat and me holding 2 seats that I could later grant to other executives as the team developed. I signed the documents Wednesday afternoon and received wire confirmation of the initial capital deployment Thursday morning. The company that had existed only as vision and conversation was now a legal entity with a bank account containing $3 million and a mission to transform enterprise software for mid-market companies. I named it Catalyst Technologies, a name that captured both the technical focus and the larger mission of enabling transformation for companies that traditional enterprise software ignored. The domain was available, the trademark was clear, and the name was distinctive enough to build brand recognition without being so clever that it obscured what we actually did. Diana scheduled a kickoff meeting for Friday morning at Meridian's office to discuss immediate priorities and introduce me to the potential team members she had mentioned. I spent Thursday evening preparing for those conversations, researching the backgrounds of the 3 people I would be meeting and thinking about how to evaluate whether they were right for Catalyst's founding team. The first introduction was with James Park, a senior engineer who had spent 8 years at Amazon building infrastructure for AWS before moving to a startup that had failed after series of funding. James was Korean-American, 36 years old, with the kind of deep technical expertise that could architect complex systems and the startup experience that meant he understood the difference between building technology in a large organization versus a resource-constrained environment. We met in one of Meridian's conference rooms with Diana present but deliberately quiet, allowing James and me to drive the conversation. I walked him through the vision for Catalyst and the technical challenges I anticipated in building a platform that delivered enterprise capabilities at mid-market price points. James asked intelligent questions about our approach to multi-tenancy, data security, and scalability that demonstrated he was thinking about the architecture implications of what I was describing. "The interesting challenge here," James said after I finished my overview, "is not just building the technology but building it in a way that keeps unit economics sustainable at lower price points. You cannot just scale down enterprise architecture and expect it to work profitably for mid-market clients. You need fundamentally different technical decisions about where complexity lives and what gets standardized versus customized." "Exactly," I said, excited that he had identified the core technical problem immediately. Most enterprise platforms are over-engineered for what mid-market companies actually need. They pay for capabilities they will never use and implementation complexity that their teams cannot support. We need to identify the 20% of enterprise functionality that delivers 80% of the value and build that exceptionally well rather than trying to match feature lists with incumbents. James nodded slowly, and I could see him mentally working through the technical implications. That requires discipline about what we say no to, which is hard when customers are asking for features and competitors are advertising capabilities we do not have. "I am not interested in building a company that chases every customer request," I said firmly. "I want to build a platform that solves core problems better than alternatives, and we accept that means some prospects will choose other vendors because we do not check every box on their requirements list." We spent another hour discussing technical architecture, development methodology, and team structure. By the end of the conversation, I was confident that James had the expertise and the judgment to be Catalyst's technical co-founder. The question was whether he was ready to leave the relative stability of his current position to join a company that existed as $3 million and a vision. I am interested, James said when I asked directly about his level of commitment. I have been looking for the right founding team situation, and this checks a lot of boxes for me. I want to think about it over the weekend and talk with my wife about the financial implications, but I am leaning strongly toward yes. The second potential technical co-founder was less compelling. Brilliant engineer but clearly more interested in technical challenges than in business impact, which suggested he would struggle with the pragmatic decisions that startups require. I thanked him for his time and told Diana afterward that he was not the right fit. The product leader Diana introduced me to was Maya Patel, who had spent 12 years at Salesforce leading product management for their mid-market offerings before leaving 6 months ago, because she was frustrated by how slowly large organizations moved on innovation. Maya was 42, direct in a way that some people probably found abrasive but that I immediately appreciated, and deeply knowledgeable about the specific market segment Catalyst was targeting. I have been watching the mid-market digital transformation space for 2 years looking for someone who actually understands the opportunity, Maya said after I finished my pitch. Most founders either come from enterprise backgrounds and cannot mentally adjust to mid-market constraints, or they come from SMB backgrounds and do not understand enterprise complexity. You seem to actually get both sides of the equation. I learned enterprise complexity at Hartwell and I learned mid-market constraints by watching us fail to serve that segment effectively, I said. The question is whether that experience actually translates to building a successful product, or whether I have blind spots I do not recognize yet. Everyone has blind spots, Maya said pragmatically. The question is whether you are coachable and willing to adjust when data suggests your assumptions are wrong. Are you going to be the founder who ignores customer feedback because you are convinced you know better? Or are you going to be the founder who pivots based on what the market is actually telling you? I want to build a company that solves real problems for real customers, I said. If that means adjusting our approach based on market feedback, then we adjust. I am not interested in being right about my original vision if being right means building something nobody wants to buy. Maya smiled slightly. Good answer. I have watched too many founders fail because they were more committed to their original idea than to actually creating value. We discussed product strategy, customer development methodology, and go-to-market sequencing for 90 minutes. Maya had strong opinions about how to prioritize features, which market segments to target initially, and how to structure pricing to maximize adoption while building sustainable unit economics. Some of her recommendations contradicted my initial thinking, but her reasoning was sound and based on direct experience with the customer base we were pursuing. By the end of the conversation, I wanted Maya on the founding team. She brought exactly the kind of product expertise and market knowledge that would complement my strategic vision and James's technical capabilities. I am ready to commit if you want me, Maya said when I asked about her interest level. I have been consulting for the past 6 months specifically to leave room for the right founding team opportunity. This is it. Diana had remained mostly silent during both conversations, observing how I interacted with potential team members and what questions I prioritized. After Maya left, Diana poured us both coffee and settled back into her chair with an expression of satisfaction. You handled those conversations well, Diana said. You were clear about vision without being rigid, you asked intelligent questions about their thinking, and you were honest about what you do not know yet. James and Maya would both be excellent additions to the founding team. Assuming James decides to join after talking with his wife, I said. He will join, Diana predicted. I saw how engaged he was during your technical discussion. He recognized immediately that this is a genuinely interesting architecture challenge with meaningful business impact. That combination is rare and he knows it. We spent the next hour discussing immediate priorities for the company. I needed to establish basic operational infrastructure including banking relationships, legal entity formation, and accounting systems. I needed to begin customer development conversations to validate assumptions about market needs and willingness to pay. I needed to start building the product roadmap and technical architecture that would guide development once James officially joined as co-founder. You should also think about your own positioning, Diana added. Right now you are Sophia Reeves who got fired from Hartwell Technologies. In 6 months you need to be Sophia Reeves, founder and CEO of Catalyst Technologies, with a compelling story about why you are building this company. The narrative matters for recruiting, fundraising, and customer credibility. The narrative Diana was describing could not be about revenge against Richard, even though that motivation was undeniably part of what drove me. It needed to be about the market opportunity, about democratizing enterprise technology, about my experience watching talented mid-market companies struggle with inadequate tools because the industry had not built solutions appropriate to their needs. I understand, I said. The story is about what we are building, not about what I am running from. Exactly, Diana confirmed. Though between us, watching you build a company that makes Richard Hartwell's strategic decisions look catastrophically short-sighted will be deeply satisfying. Just make sure that satisfaction comes from building something valuable rather than from his failure. I drove home from that meeting feeling the full weight and possibility of what I had committed to building. $3 million in funding, a technical co-founder likely to join, a product leader ready to commit, and a mission to transform enterprise software for an underserved market. 6 months ago, I had been a director at Hartwell Technologies trying to make my ideas fit within Richard's limited vision. Now I was a founder building exactly what I thought the market needed without anyone constraining my strategic decisions. The apartment felt different when I entered it that evening. Marcus's belongings were gone, removed during the day while I was at meetings. The space was emptier but also lighter, freed from the physical reminders of a marriage that had been failing long before the board meeting made it obvious. I ordered dinner from my favorite Vietnamese restaurant and opened my laptop to begin drafting the product roadmap that would guide Catalyst's development. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Talked with my wife. I am in. When do we start? I smiled and texted back immediately. Monday morning. Welcome to Catalyst Technologies. The founding team was coming together. The vision was clear. The funding was in place. Everything I needed to build a company that would prove Richard Hartwell had made the mistake of his career was within reach. And I was just getting started. The first official week of Catalyst Technologies began in a co-working space in South Lake Union that Diana had arranged through one of Meridian's portfolio companies. The space was open plan with glass-walled conference rooms and standing desks, filled with other early-stage startups whose founders nodded at each other in the kitchen area with the camaraderie of people who understood they were all engaged in the same high-risk endeavor. It was a dramatic change from the marble-floored executive suites at Hartwell Technologies, and the contrast felt appropriate for what I was trying to build. James arrived Monday morning at 7:30 carrying a backpack and a portable monitor, ready to begin architecting the platform that would become Catalyst's core product. Maya showed up 15 minutes later with a leather portfolio containing customer interview scripts and a market segmentation framework she had developed over the weekend. We claimed a corner of the co-working space as Catalyst's temporary headquarters and spent the first 2 hours of the day establishing working agreements about communication norms, decision-making authority, and strategic priorities. I want to be clear about something from the beginning, I said as we settled into our first official strategy session. This company will succeed or fail based on whether we solve real problems for real customers. I have a vision for what we should build, but that vision needs to be validated and refined by actual market feedback. If data suggests we are wrong about something fundamental, we adjust rather than defending our original assumptions. James nodded agreement. I have seen too many startups fail because founders fell in love with their solution before they fully understood the problem. We should be building the minimum technical architecture that allows us to test core hypotheses, not trying to create the perfect platform before we have customers. Maya pulled out her market segmentation framework and spread it across the conference table we had commandeered. The framework divided potential customers into 6 distinct categories based on company size, industry vertical, technology maturity, and budget constraints. Each segment had different needs, different purchasing processes, and different value drivers that would influence whether they chose Catalyst over alternatives. The critical strategic decision we need to make in the next 2 weeks, Maya said, pointing to the framework, is which segment we target first. We cannot build for everyone simultaneously with our current resources. We need to identify the customer profile where we have the strongest product market fit potential and focus all our development and go-to-market efforts there. We spent 3 hours working through the segmentation analysis, debating the merits of different target customers. Professional services firms had urgent digital transformation needs, but were notoriously difficult to sell to because decision-making was distributed across multiple partners. Healthcare organizations had substantial budgets, but faced regulatory constraints that complicated technology adoption. Manufacturing companies were experiencing massive pressure to modernize, but often lacked internal technical expertise to evaluate platforms effectively. The segment that emerged as most promising was what Maya called scaled mid-market technology adopters. These were companies with annual revenue between $50 million and $500 million that had already invested in some enterprise technology, but were struggling to integrate systems and leverage data effectively. They had dedicated technology staff but not large enough teams to manage complex enterprise platforms. They had budgets for software but were price-sensitive compared to true enterprise buyers. Most importantly, they were actively searching for better solutions because their current technology stack was not meeting their needs. This segment represents our ideal early adopter profile, Maya explained. They understand the value proposition immediately because they are already experiencing the pain we are solving. They have budget authority to make purchasing decisions without endless procurement processes. And they are sophisticated enough to evaluate whether our platform actually delivers on its promises. James was already sketching technical architecture on a whiteboard, mapping out how the platform would need to function to serve this customer profile effectively. If we are targeting companies with existing technology stacks, we need robust integration capabilities from day one, he said. These customers will not rip out their current systems to adopt our platform. We need to work alongside what they already have and demonstrate value quickly. The technical implications of that requirement were significant. Instead of building a comprehensive platform that tried to replace everything a company used for digital operations, we would build an integration and orchestration layer that made existing systems work better together. The approach was less ambitious than what I had originally envisioned, but it was also more pragmatic and more likely to generate rapid adoption. I love this direction, I said, feeling excitement build as the strategy crystallized. We are not asking customers to bet their entire digital transformation on an unproven startup. We are offering them a relatively low-risk way to get more value from technology investments they have already made. That dramatically reduces the barriers to initial adoption. We spent the rest of that first week refining the target customer profile, developing interview scripts for customer discovery conversations, and beginning to map the technical architecture that would support the integration-focused approach. Diana stopped by the co-working space Wednesday afternoon to check on progress and review our strategic decisions. She listened carefully to our market segmentation logic and nodded approval at the technical approach James was proposing. This is smart positioning, Diana said after we walked her through the strategy. You are not trying to compete head-to-head with enterprise platforms on feature breadth. You are solving a specific high-value problem that existing solutions handle poorly. That gives you a clear differentiation story and a logical expansion path as you add capabilities over time. She had also brought preliminary introductions to 3 potential customers who fit our target profile and had expressed interest in learning about new approaches to enterprise technology integration. These were companies in Meridian's extended network, not portfolio companies themselves but organizations that had worked with Meridian-backed firms or whose executives had relationships with Diana's partners. I am giving you warm introductions, Diana said as she sent the email connections from her phone. But you need to handle these conversations as genuine customer discovery, not sales pitches. Your objective is to understand their current challenges, validate that our solution hypothesis is correct, and identify what would make them willing to be early adopters. Do not oversell capabilities we have not built yet. Maya and I divided the 3 introductions and scheduled calls for the following week. In the meantime, we needed to develop our customer interview methodology and prepare the materials that would make these conversations productive. Maya had deep experience with customer discovery from her Salesforce years, and she coached me through the techniques that would generate useful insights rather than just polite conversation. The key is asking about specific situations rather than general opinions, Maya explained as we practiced interview questions. Do not ask whether they think integration capabilities would be valuable. Ask them to describe the last time they struggled to get data from one system into another system and what that cost them in terms of time, money, or missed opportunities. Specific stories reveal actual needs. General opinions tell you what people think they are supposed to say. I conducted my first customer discovery call on Tuesday of the second week. The contact was Sarah Chan, Chief Operating Officer of a healthcare technology company, with $200 million in annual revenue and 300 employees distributed across 8 offices. Sarah had been introduced through Diana with context that her company was struggling with digital transformation challenges despite having invested heavily in various enterprise platforms over the past 5 years. The conversation started with casual rapport building before I transitioned into the interview questions Maya and I had prepared. I asked Sarah to walk me through her company's current technology landscape, describing what systems they use for different functions and how those systems connected to each other. Her description revealed exactly the kind of fragmented complexity that Catalyst was designed to address. We have Salesforce for customer relationship management, NetSuite for financial operations, Workday for human resources, and about 15 other specialized applications for various departmental functions, Sarah explained. Each system works reasonably well in isolation, but getting them to communicate with each other is a constant struggle. We have data trapped in silos and we are making critical business decisions based on incomplete information because nobody has time to manually compile reports from 8 different platforms. I asked Sarah to describe a specific recent situation where the integration challenges had created real business problems. She told me about a quarterly board meeting where they had discovered that customer churn data from Salesforce did not match revenue retention data from NetSuite because the 2 systems calculated customer status differently, and no one had built integration logic to reconcile the differences. The discrepancy had made the executive team look incompetent in front of board members and had consumed dozens of staff hours to investigate and resolve. How much did that situation cost you? I asked. In terms of staff time, damaged credibility, and delayed decision-making. Sarah thought for a moment before responding. Conservatively, $50,000 in direct labor costs to resolve the data inconsistency and rebuild trust with the board. But the bigger cost was the strategic decisions we did not make because we could not trust our data. We delayed launching a new service line by 3 months because we were not confident in our customer segmentation analysis. That delay probably cost us $2 million in foregone revenue. The specific numbers were valuable for understanding the economic impact of the problem we were solving. If Sarah's experience was representative of our target customer segment, companies were losing millions of dollars annually to integration challenges. A platform that reduced those costs, even modestly, would generate compelling return on investment. I asked Sarah what she had tried previously to address the integration challenges. She described hiring consultants who had built custom integration scripts that broke whenever any of the underlying platforms updated their APIs. She described purchasing middleware tools that required specialized technical expertise her team did not possess. She described assigning internal staff to manual data reconciliation processes that consumed hours every week without actually solving the underlying problems. What would make you willing to try a new approach? I asked. Given that you have already invested in solutions that did not work as hoped. Sarah's answer was illuminating. I would need to see a platform that could deliver value quickly without requiring us to rip out and replace our existing systems. I would need transparent pricing that did not explode as we added users or data volume. And I would need confidence that the vendor would still be around in 3 years to support the platform as our needs evolved. Too many startups in this space fail after 18 months and leave customers stranded with orphan technology. The concern about startup longevity was reasonable, and something we would need to address in our positioning and go-to-market approach. Having Meridian's backing helped with credibility, but we would need to demonstrate technical competence and market traction quickly to overcome the natural hesitation about betting on an unproven vendor. I concluded the call by asking Sarah whether she would be willing to participate in our beta program once we had initial platform capabilities ready for testing. She agreed enthusiastically and offered to introduce me to 2 other COOs in her network who were dealing with similar integration challenges. Maya and James were waiting eagerly when I finished the call, curious about what I had learned. I walked them through the conversation highlights and shared my notes about the specific pain points Sarah had described. James immediately began thinking about technical implications while Maya focused on go-to-market strategy. The board meeting story is gold, Maya said. That is the kind of specific, emotional business problem that makes executives willing to take risks on new vendors. We should be collecting stories like that from every customer conversation and using them in our positioning materials. James was sketching integration architecture on the whiteboard. The technical challenge Sarah described about Salesforce and NetSuite calculating customer status differently is exactly the kind of problem we can solve with intelligent data reconciliation. We build transformation logic that understands how different systems define common entities, and we automatically map between them. That is not technically complex, but it requires understanding business context, which is where most middleware tools fail. We spent the rest of the day synthesizing insights from my conversation with Sarah and preparing for the other customer discovery calls scheduled that week. Each conversation revealed similar patterns. Mid-market companies had invested heavily in enterprise platforms, but struggled to make those platforms work together effectively. They were losing money and strategic opportunities to data silos and integration failures. They wanted solutions that delivered value quickly without requiring wholesale replacement of existing technology investments. By the end of the second week, we had conducted 12 customer discovery interviews and identified clear patterns in customer needs, purchasing criteria, and willingness to adopt new solutions. Maya compiled the insights into a comprehensive market validation report that documented the specific problems we were solving, the economic impact of those problems, and the product capabilities that customers indicated would make them willing to become early adopters. This is stronger validation than I have seen in most seed-stage companies, Diana said when we presented the market validation report at our first formal board meeting. You have done genuine customer discovery, rather than just confirming your own assumptions. The problems you are solving are real, and the customers you are targeting have budget authority to purchase solutions. That significantly de-risks the next phase of development. The board meeting was held at Meridian's office with Diana, James, Maya, and me in attendance. We had prepared a comprehensive update covering our progress over the first 2 weeks, our refined market strategy, our preliminary product roadmap, and our budget allocation for the next 6 months. Diana asked challenging questions about our timeline assumptions, our hiring plans, and our customer acquisition strategy, but her questions came from a place of helping us think more clearly rather than doubting our approach. Your next milestone is delivering a functional beta that demonstrates core integration capabilities, Diana said as we reviewed the product roadmap. You need to get technology into customer hands quickly, so you can validate that the platform actually solves the problems you have identified through discovery interviews. How quickly can you have something ready for beta testing? James had been thinking about this timeline carefully. If we ruthlessly prioritize the minimum capabilities needed to demonstrate value, we can have a beta-ready platform in 8 weeks. That means building integration connectors for the 5 most common enterprise platforms our target customers use, developing the data transformation engine that reconciles differences between systems, and creating a basic dashboard that visualizes the integrated data. Everything else can wait until we have validated that the core value proposition resonates with customers. 8 weeks is aggressive but achievable, I said. It requires us to make hard choices about what we build now versus what we defer until later. But I would rather have a limited platform in customer hands quickly than a comprehensive platform that takes 6 months to develop. Diana nodded approval. Speed to market matters in enterprise software. Your window of opportunity exists because incumbents are not serving this customer segment well, but that window will not stay open indefinitely. If you can demonstrate traction with early customers, you will be well positioned for Series A fundraising in 12 to 18 months. The mention of Series A fundraising was premature given that we were only 2 weeks into the company's existence, but it reinforced that Diana was thinking about long-term value creation, rather than just the immediate product development challenges. Catalyst was not a lifestyle business or a consulting firm that happened to build software. We were building a venture-scale company that could generate the kind of returns that justified institutional investment. After the board meeting concluded, Diana asked me to stay for a brief one-on-one conversation. We moved to her office, a space that was notably modest compared to Richard Hartwell's executive suite, but conveyed competence and focus through the strategic planning documents covering her walls and the portfolio company updates organized on her desk. I want to make sure you are managing the emotional complexity of what you are building, Diana said once we were settled. You are creating a company that will inevitably compete with Hartwell Technologies. That means you will be seeing Richard and Marcus in competitive situations, reading about Hartwell in trade publications, and potentially facing direct attacks as you gain market visibility. How are you preparing yourself for that reality? The question was more personal than I expected from a board conversation, but it addressed something I had been deliberately avoiding thinking about. I am trying to focus on building Catalyst rather than on competing with Hartwell, I said. The company succeeds or fails based on whether we create value for customers, not based on whether we damage Richard's business. That is the right strategic mindset, Diana agreed. But strategy and emotion are not the same thing. You were publicly humiliated in that board meeting. Your husband betrayed you. Your father-in-law dismissed work you had invested years developing. Those wounds do not heal just because you start a new company. I want to make sure you have support systems in place to process the emotional reality of what you experienced. I appreciated Diana's directness about something most investors would consider outside their purview. I am working with a therapist, I admitted. I started sessions 2 weeks ago, right after the board meeting. It helps to have a space where I can be honest about the anger and grief without worrying about how it affects my professional credibility. Good, Diana said firmly. Building a company is psychologically demanding under the best circumstances. Building a company while processing divorce and professional betrayal is exponentially harder. The therapy is not weakness. It is strategic investment in your own capacity to lead effectively. We talked for another 20 minutes about the practical realities of managing stress, maintaining perspective, and building resilience for the long journey of company building. Diana shared stories from her own experience founding and scaling her previous company, including the periods where she had doubted whether she could continue and the strategies she had used to push through those difficult moments. The revenge you are building is not about destroying Richard, Diana said as our conversation concluded. It is about proving to yourself that your vision was correct and your capabilities were underestimated. When Catalyst succeeds, the greatest victory will not be Richard's recognition of his mistake. It will be your own knowledge that you built something valuable on your own terms. I left Meridian's office that evening feeling both energized by the progress we had made and sobered by the challenges still ahead. 2 weeks of intensive work had produced market validation, a founding team, and a clear product strategy. But we were still months away from having technology that customers could actually use, and there were countless ways the company could fail between now and meaningful traction. The co-working space was mostly empty when I returned to collect my laptop and notes. A few other founders were still working at their desks, hunched over screens with the intense focus that startup building required. I recognized the look because I now wore it myself. We were all engaged in the same fundamental gamble, betting years of our lives and our professional credibility on visions that might never materialize into sustainable businesses. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was Marcus. The subject line simply, "Please read." I almost deleted it without opening, but curiosity overcame my better judgment. The email was 3 paragraphs of carefully constructed appeals to reconsider the divorce. Marcus wrote about the years we had spent together, about the life we had built, about the mistakes he acknowledged making but framed as misunderstandings rather than fundamental character failures. He suggested couples counseling. He promised to be more supportive of my career going forward. He asked me to remember who we had been to each other before work complications had strained our relationship. I read the email twice before deleting it. Marcus was offering to change now that I had demonstrated I did not need him, now that I had funding and a founding team and the beginning of a company that could actually succeed. The timing revealed that his interest in preserving our marriage had less to do with love and more to do with not wanting to be the person who lost something valuable through his own failures. I drafted a brief response explaining that the divorce was not negotiable and asked him to direct all future communication through attorneys. Then I deleted the draft without sending it. Marcus did not deserve even that much closure. He deserved exactly what he had given me in that board meeting, which was silence. Rachel called as I was driving home through evening Seattle traffic. "How was the board meeting?" she asked without preamble. "Productive," I said. Diana is exactly the kind of investor I hoped she would be. Demanding but supportive, focused on long-term value creation, genuinely helpful with strategic thinking. "And how are you doing emotionally?" Rachel asked. You have been moving at an insane pace for 2 weeks. Starting a company, filing for divorce, processing everything that happened at Hartwell. That is a lot of life transformation in a very compressed time frame. I am holding it together, I said, which was true even if it was not the complete picture. Some days are harder than others. But building Catalyst gives me something productive to focus on instead of just sitting with anger about Richard and Marcus. Just make sure you are actually processing the emotions rather than using the company as elaborate avoidance, Rachel said gently. I know you, Sophia. You are capable of pushing through anything when you have a mission. But eventually the unprocessed feelings catch up with you. She was right and I knew it. The therapy sessions were helpful, but I was still compartmentalizing more than I probably should. There would be time later to fully process the grief and betrayal. Right now I needed to focus on building a company that would prove everyone who had underestimated me had made a catastrophic error in judgment. I promise I am taking care of myself, I told Rachel. And I promise to actually ask for help if I start struggling. Good, Rachel said. Because I need you to succeed at this. Not just for your sake, although obviously I want that. But because watching you build something that makes Richard Hartwell's strategic decisions look catastrophically stupid is going to be the highlight of my year. We talked for another 20 minutes before hanging up. When I reached my apartment, I made dinner and reviewed the customer discovery notes from the week's interviews. Each conversation had revealed additional nuances about customer needs, purchasing processes, and competitive alternatives. The accumulated insights were building into a comprehensive understanding of the market opportunity we were pursuing. I opened a new document and began drafting what I was calling the Catalyst Playbook, a living document that captured our strategic thinking, our customer insights, and our product philosophy. This would become the reference point for future team members, the articulation of how we thought about the market and why we were making the strategic choices we were making. It would also serve as my own processing tool, a way to transform scattered observations into coherent strategic framework. The playbook began with customer problem definition, describing in specific detail the integration challenges that mid-market companies faced and the economic impact of those challenges. It moved through our product philosophy about building integration and orchestration capabilities, rather than trying to replace existing enterprise platforms. It outlined our go-to-market strategy focused on scaled mid-market technology adopters who had budget authority and urgent needs. It concluded with our long-term vision for how Catalyst would evolve from initial integration capabilities into a comprehensive platform that fundamentally changed how mid-market companies approached digital transformation. I wrote until nearly midnight, refining language and adding examples from customer conversations. When I finally saved the document and closed my laptop, I had created something that articulated not just what Catalyst was building but why it mattered and how it was different from everything else in the market. Richard Hartwell had told me I lacked the competence for my role at his company. He had commissioned analysis claiming my initiatives were poorly conceived and inadequately executed. He had terminated me in front of 20 executives with the implicit message that I had been given opportunities beyond my capabilities. The Catalyst playbook I had just written demonstrated strategic thinking and market understanding that would impress anyone who read it objectively. The customer discovery we had conducted in 2 weeks revealed insights that most companies took months to develop. The founding team we had assembled possessed exactly the combination of technical expertise and market knowledge needed to execute on our vision. Everything Richard had said about my inadequacy was being systematically disproven by what I was building. And we were only 2 weeks into Catalyst's existence. 6 months from now, the company would have customers, revenue, and market validation that would make my termination from Hartwell Technologies look like the catastrophic failure of judgment it actually was. And I would be just getting started. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday morning in late March, delivered by a process server who knocked on my apartment door at 7:15 while I was finishing coffee and reviewing the technical architecture documents James had sent the night before. I signed for the manila envelope without emotion, set it on the kitchen counter unopened, and returned to the architecture review. Marcus could respond to the filing through his own attorneys. I had more important priorities than managing his feelings about the dissolution of our marriage. The apartment had transformed over the past month into something that felt genuinely mine, rather than a space I shared with someone whose presence had always dominated the environment. I had rearranged furniture to create a dedicated workspace near the windows overlooking the city. I had removed the artwork Marcus had chosen and replaced it with whiteboards where I sketched product strategy and customer journey maps. The bedroom no longer held any trace of him beyond the slight indentation on his side of the mattress that would eventually disappear as the memory foam readjusted to accommodating only my weight. Living alone after 4 years of marriage required adjustment to rhythms and routines that no longer needed to account for another person's preferences and schedules. I could work until midnight without anyone questioning whether I was avoiding emotional intimacy by focusing on the company. I could eat cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row without judgment about inadequate meal planning. I could spread customer interview notes across the dining table for days without needing to clear them for some social obligation Marcus had committed us to without consulting me first. The solitude was not lonely. It was clarifying. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based entirely on what I wanted and what Catalyst needed without filtering those choices through the complicated calculus of maintaining a marriage that had been failing long before the board meeting made it obvious. The freedom was intoxicating and slightly terrifying in equal measure, like standing at the edge of something vast with no safety equipment but also no constraints on where I could choose to go. Rachel came over that evening ostensibly to check on how I was handling the divorce filing, but actually because she wanted updates on Catalyst's progress that went beyond what I could share in text messages. We ordered Indian food and spread out on my living room floor with laptops and notebooks while I walked her through the customer discovery findings and the preliminary product roadmap James had developed. "This is incredibly sophisticated for a company that is only a month old," Rachel said as she reviewed the market segmentation analysis Maya had created. "You have customer insights that most Series A companies would be thrilled to possess. How did you generate this level of understanding so quickly?" "Maya is exceptional at customer discovery methodology," I explained. She developed this framework during her years at Salesforce where she led product management for mid-market offerings. "We are essentially applying enterprise-grade customer development processes to an early-stage startup, which gives us advantages that most founders at this stage do not have." Rachel was quiet for a moment, studying the customer journey maps with the kind of focused attention she brought to strategic analysis. "You realize that what you are building directly competes with the digital transformation initiatives Hartwell is trying to sell to mid-market customers," she said finally. "The integration and orchestration capabilities you are describing would solve exactly the problems that Hartwell's enterprise platform creates through over-engineering and implementation complexity." I had recognized this reality weeks ago, but hearing Rachel articulate it made the competitive implications more concrete. "Catalyst will eventually compete with Hartwell in specific market segments," I acknowledged. "But initially we are too small to be on Richard's radar. By the time he realizes we are a genuine threat, we will have enough customer traction and market credibility that he cannot simply dismiss us as his former daughter-in-law's revenge project." "He is going to be furious when he figures out what you are building," Rachel said with obvious satisfaction. "Not just that you are competing with him but that you are executing the exact strategy you proposed internally and he rejected. Every customer you win will be evidence that his decision to fire you was catastrophically wrong." The vindication would be satisfying, but I was increasingly convinced that Diana had been right about the nature of meaningful revenge. The greatest victory would not be Richard's acknowledgement of his mistake. It would be my own knowledge that I had built something valuable that existed independently of anything he had done or failed to do. Catalyst needed to succeed on its own merits, solving real problems for real customers, or the victory would be hollow regardless of how much it damaged Richard's ego. We spent the rest of the evening discussing the practical challenges of building a company, while processing divorce and professional betrayal simultaneously. Rachel shared observations about my emotional state that were uncomfortably perceptive, noting that I was using work as a mechanism to avoid fully processing grief and anger. She was not wrong, but I also was not ready to slow down enough to sit with feelings that threatened to overwhelm me if I gave them too much attention. "Just promise me you will actually deal with this at some point," Rachel said as she was leaving around 11. "You cannot build a sustainable company on a foundation of unprocessed trauma and rage. Eventually that catches up with you in ways that damage both you and the business." I promised I would continue therapy and would pay attention to my emotional state, even as I maintained intense focus on Catalyst's development. Rachel hugged me hard before leaving, making me promise to call if I needed support beyond what professional therapy could provide. I locked the door behind her and stood in my living room looking at the customer discovery documents spread across every surface, feeling the weight of what I had committed to building pressing against the exhaustion that threatened to break through my carefully maintained focus. The next morning I met with the commercial real estate broker Diana had recommended to discuss finding dedicated office space for Catalyst. The co-working arrangement had been adequate for the first month while we were primarily conducting customer discovery interviews and developing initial technical architecture. But we needed private space as the team expanded, and we began building proprietary technology that required security and confidentiality. The broker showed me 3 options in South Lake Union and Pioneer Square, each with different advantages regarding price, location, and layout. The space I was most drawn to was a small office on the 4th floor of a renovated building in Pioneer Square with exposed brick walls, large windows overlooking the street, and enough room for 15 people as the team grew. The lease terms were reasonable and the location had the kind of startup authenticity that felt appropriate for a company that was still proving its right to exist. I signed a 12-month lease that afternoon and immediately began planning how to configure the space to support the kind of collaborative culture I wanted Catalyst to develop. Open workspace for the engineering team with acoustically isolated areas for focused individual work. Glass-walled conference rooms for customer calls and team meetings. A kitchen area that would become the social center where people gathered to decompress and exchange ideas informally. Whiteboards covering entire walls where we could map customer journeys and technical architectures and strategic roadmaps. The office represented commitment in ways that went beyond the financial obligation of the lease. This was physical space dedicated to Catalyst's existence, a location where customers would eventually visit for product demonstrations, and where team members would spend thousands of hours building technology that would either validate or invalidate everything I believed about the market opportunity we were pursuing. The decision to sign the lease felt momentous in proportion to the actual square footage involved. James and Maya were excited when I told them about the new office space during our daily stand-up meeting. We had been conducting these meetings remotely each morning at 8:30 to coordinate priorities and address blockers, but the rhythm of working from separate locations was beginning to feel constraining as we moved from planning phase into actual product development. Having dedicated space where we could work together physically would accelerate the kind of spontaneous collaboration that generated breakthrough insights. "When can we move in?" James asked immediately. "I have equipment being delivered next week for the development environment, and I would prefer to set it up in our permanent space rather than dealing with moving it later." "We can access the space starting Monday," I said. "I am meeting with a furniture vendor tomorrow to order desks, chairs, and conference room equipment. We should be fully operational by the end of next week." Maya was already thinking about how to use the new office for customer engagement. "We should plan a small launch event once we have the beta platform ready," she suggested. "Invite the customers we have been doing discovery interviews with, show them the initial product capabilities, and get their feedback in person rather than through remote demonstrations. The office gives us a physical space to create that kind of experience." The idea had merit. A launch event would create urgency around beta testing timelines, and would give us opportunity to deepen relationships with the potential early adopters we had been cultivating through discovery conversations. It would also generate the kind of market visibility that would help with recruiting and future fundraising as we demonstrated that Catalyst was a real company with real customers rather than just a vision and seed funding. We spent the rest of the stand-up meeting planning the logistics of moving into the new office and establishing the working rhythms that would carry us through the intensive product development phase ahead. James outlined the technical infrastructure we needed to implement before engineers could begin coding. Maya described the customer feedback mechanisms we should build into the beta platform from the beginning so we could iterate rapidly based on actual usage patterns. I committed to finalizing our first round of engineering hires, so we could expand the team from 3 founders to 8 people by the end of April. The hiring process consumed the next 2 weeks of my attention. Diana had made introductions to several strong engineering candidates from her network, and I was also working with a technical recruiter who specialized in early-stage startup placements. Each candidate required multiple interviews to assess technical capabilities, cultural fit, and genuine enthusiasm for what Catalyst was building. I was learning to evaluate not just whether someone could do the job we needed filled, but whether they had the specific combination of skills and mindset that would thrive in the chaotic environment of early-stage company building. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.